The fury coming from Oscar Piastri and Carlos Sainz as they arrived in Las Vegas was impossible to ignore. Both drivers are genuinely furious with the FIA after what they see as an unacceptable decision during the Brazilian Grand Prix, and the reaction across the paddock reflects just how serious this situation has become. What happened in São Paulo wasn't just a questionable call. It was a penalty that felt completely disconnected from racing reality, and both drivers have made it clear that the line has been crossed. The frustration stems from the 10-second penalty handed to Piastri for his clash with Kimi Antonelli at the safety car restart. The stewards applied the rulebook as if it existed in a vacuum, ignoring the lack of visibility, the abrupt braking ahead, the chaos of a restart, and the split-second reactions that define real racing. Even Charles Leclerc, the innocent victim who lost a wheel in the collision, defended Piastri and insisted he shouldn't have taken full blame. That rare show of unity between rivals only deepened the sense that the FIA's decision was out of touch. Sainz's anger adds another layer entirely. He didn't hesitate to call the penalty unacceptable and demanded an urgent meeting with the FIA to address what he believes is a growing problem with how incidents are judged. He pointed to several controversial penalties this year: Zandvoort, Monza, Austin, and argued that the current system punishes drivers for situations that used to be considered normal wheel-to-wheel racing. His criticism isn't emotional, technical, grounded in experience, and delivered with the authority of someone who understands how fragile the balance of fair competition can be. The timing makes everything even more explosive. Piastri's penalty didn't just damage his Brazilian Grand Prix, it damaged his championship campaign, widening the gap to Norris at a critical moment in the season. Both he and Sainz view the decision as more than a simple misjudgment. They see it as a failure in consistency and a threat to the integrity of the sport. Now, as the drivers gather in Las Vegas, the pressure on the FIA to provide answers has reached its peak. The anger that Piastri and Sainz brought with them to Las Vegas should worry the FIA more than any fan reaction ever could, because this isn't just frustration, it's a complete loss of trust. Watching how Brazil unfolded, it's impossible not to understand where they're coming from. That penalty felt like the kind of decision you'd expect from a system that values diagrams over reality, rules over logic, and rigidity over racing instincts. And standing here now, listening to both of them speak openly about it, it's clear that the drivers have simply had enough. What happened in Brazil wasn't just a bad call, it was a moment that exposed a deeper flaw in how modern Formula One policing works. Looking at the incident itself, you can immediately see why so many drivers defended Piastri. Restarts are always chaotic, braking zones compress, reactions happen in fractions of a second, and drivers don't operate with perfect spacing. They operate with instinct and trust. Piastri braked because Antonelli braked harder. Antonelli turned in because he thought there was more space. Leclerc got caught in the middle of a chain reaction nobody intended. That's racing. And the frustrating part is that everyone in the field recognized it as racing, except the FIA, who applied their guidelines like a mathematical formula instead of trying to understand what actually happened. The more you examine the FIA's explanation, the more detached it feels from real on-track behavior. Saying a driver is wholly responsible just because his front axle wasn't perfectly aligned ignores everything that makes wheel-to-wheel racing unpredictable. It ignores the lack of visibility at that angle. It ignores the accordion effect at safety car restarts. It ignores the fact that Antonelli knew Piastri was there. It even ignores Leclerc openly admitting the blame wasn't one-sided. When the victim says the guilty verdict is wrong, something isn't right. Sainz clearly senses this disconnect. And the way he addressed it shows just how deep the problem runs. He didn't just say the penalty was harsh, he said it was unacceptable for the pinnacle of motorsport. And coming from someone with his experience and technical understanding, that isn't an emotional outburst. That's a diagnosis. He's pointing out inconsistency, lost nuance, and a set of rules that seem to punish every mistake, rather than differentiate between intent, reaction, and circumstance. When Sainz lists example after example from his own season, Zandvoort, Monza, Austin, it becomes obvious why Brazil pushed him over the edge. The worrying part is how Piastri himself reacted. He didn't come out swinging, but that silence didn't sound like acceptance. It sounded like disappointment. He knows his championship chances took a massive hit. He knows 10 seconds at this stage of the season is a wound that doesn't heal. And when he says other drivers doing the talking is enough, he's saying something without saying it. The penalty was so obviously wrong that speaking loudly isn't even necessary. When Charles Leclerc, whose race ended because of the accident, defends Piastri, the message is loud enough on its own. You can sense the tension here in Las Vegas because this isn't a simple disagreement anymore. This is a wider debate about whether the FIA's current system reflects racing reality. The guidelines introduced after the Norris-Verstappen clashes were supposed to provide clarity, but they've ended up creating rigidity. Lock-ups, which happen constantly in racing without consequence, are now treated as out-of-control moments, even when the driver still makes the apex. Light contact is treated as recklessness. Situations that used to be judged as racing incidents are now seen through a black-and-white filter that leaves no room for instinct. Sainz's suggestion of permanent stewards actually makes sense when you hear the reasoning behind it. Consistency doesn't come from paperwork. It comes from familiar interpretation, people who understand patterns, histories, tendencies. If stewards changed less often, drivers could understand how certain decisions will be judged instead of gambling on a new interpretation every weekend. Right now, racing doesn't just depend on what you do on track. It depends on who is sitting in the stewarding room on that particular day. And that alone shows why frustration is boiling over. The consequences go far beyond one penalty, because what happened in Brazil changed the shape of the championship. Piastri now enters Las Vegas not only trailing Norris, but doing so with a sense of injustice hanging over him. Momentum is everything in a title fight, and losing 10 seconds for something most drivers call unavoidable feels like being punished not for your mistake, but for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The FIA may not acknowledge the emotional cost of their decisions, but the drivers feel it. In a battle as tight as this one, emotional damage matters just as much as points. The broader issue is that fans, drivers, and even team principals are beginning to question whether the current approach to officiating has lost touch with what Formula One is meant to be. Racing is unpredictable. Racing is messy. Racing requires judgment, not equations. And Piastri's penalty has become the example everyone is pointing to as proof that the pendulum has swung too far toward rigidity. Both he and Sainz have made it clear this isn't about wanting leniency. It's about demanding that the sport acknowledges human instinct, not just rulebook geometry. As the paddock prepares for the weekend, the FIA now faces a level of pressure it can no longer ignore. Piastri wants clarity. Sainz wants reform. Other drivers want consistency. Fans want to see racing judged with understanding, not spreadsheets. What began as one decision in Brazil has erupted into a much bigger conversation, one that Las Vegas, with all its intensity and spectacle, is about to amplify even further. Because this isn't just about justice for one driver, it's about restoring faith in how Formula One decides what is fair.